A little less than 2 years ago, Greece's state-owned broadcaster, ERT, was shut down. The government of the day called it an austerity measure, saying that ERT was corrupt and wasteful. But many Greeks saw it as an act of politics, not least the employees who defied the closure and kept on working without pay. The ERT occupation became a symbol in the fight against austerity, which partly explains why the newly elected Syriza coalition government, led by Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras, is so determined to get the channel back on the air. Another explanation is that this new government needs friends in the media, and it expects that the rough ride that Syriza got in privately owned corporate media during the run-up to the election will continue now that it's in office. But many have criticized the new government's legislative attempt to revive ERT, saying it's too similar to previous bills that Parliament has already seen, that it fails to address previous issues. Greece has some serious financial problems, and a state broadcaster does cost money, so there is a legitimate question as to whether Syriza will be able to afford this venture and if ERT's content will be up to scratch. The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead now from Athens on the resurrection of ERT.
It was March 2012 and Greece had just been bailed out for the second time. It owed its lenders more than 200 billion euros. But the money came on the condition of strict austerity. Athens had to cut spending and reduce thousands of jobs in the public sector. New Democracy, the government of the day, looked at ERT, the state broadcaster, and saw a quick fix. With more than 2,500 workers and a reputation for reckless spending and cronyism, shutting it down seemed like an easy option.
So ERT had a big payroll for individuals who were hired as political favors or due to their personal relationships with members of parliament.
These colleagues had no reason to exist, either as technical staff or administrative staff, as consultants or among the journalists. The government called us sacred cows, but it was the government's own recruits who were the sacred cows.
You can see programs that were produced during the previous period of ERT that were, excuses for paying out money because the quality was so low and the real costs of producing them were so low that the only reason that they were produced was in order to hand out favors to friendly producers.
The quality and the quantity of the programs on offer reflected the quality of past governments, New Democracy and PASOK, that were suffocating in the way that they interfered in the schedule, delivery and selection of reports.
On June 11, 2013, staff learnt from their own coverage that ERT was being shut down. But many argued that the closure wasn't just about austerity, it was political, and that the state broadcaster was editorially out of step with the majority of the news media in Greece, owned by big diversified conglomerates that did a lot of business with the government. The media outlets they owned backed the austerity. ERT sometimes questioned it, although the ratings were so low that some say the channel had no real influence on the debate. But if the government thought that the workers would go quietly, it was wrong.
The decision of the ERT workers to keep going started half an hour after the announcement of the closure. ERT was shut down following a political decision, so all we could do was stay on the front line of this fight and keep broadcasting society's voice.
But I don't think many people cared about the old ERT. Why? Because the ratings were so low. So when you say that people are supporting the state broadcaster, you have to state what do you mean exactly. Because if support means watching it, well, no, they're not watching it. And they weren't watching it before.
Nor were they watching ERT's replacement, Nerit, a skeleton state broadcaster which the pro-austerity government set up with a fraction of the budget, fraction of the staff, and a negligible journalistic impact. All the while, the ERT journalists continued their occupation of the building and were still putting out news online via a website they created called ERT Open. Nearly 5 months after first trying to shut down the channel in Athens, the government had to send in some muscle to finish the job. After the police raid and the remaining journalists were removed from this building in Athens, most Greeks would have thought that that was the end of the ERT occupation and the state broadcaster itself. They were wrong, because a little less than 500 kilometers north from here, in Thessaloniki, around 50 media workers persevered. They stayed in their ERT building, kept producing content, and put it up on ERT's open website for free.
Our reaction as free people was to stay here and continue our work for media freedom, especially at a time when the public needed it, because free speech and the voice of those in the struggle were marginalized by the corporate media outlets under the control of the oligarchs. Gradually, our struggle and that of the Greek people became one.
We went to cover as much news as possible to help express a voice that was being presented as illegitimate. For example, when riot police were hitting the striking cleaners on a daily basis just for defending their right to work, Nerit had the title, "Cleaners Move Against the Riot Police." On the same day, we were bringing the cleaners into the studio.
Το θέμα είναι ότι δεν μας δέχονται, απαξιούνε. Απαξιούν να μας δούνε.
Interviewing them and understanding a perspective of this struggle that the private channels and Nerit refused to do.
Μέσα ενημέρωσης και τα δημόσια δεν πήγαν ποτέ να τις προβάλλουν.
The occupied ERT channel shared an anti-austerity agenda with the then opposition, the Syriza coalition led by Alexis Tsipras. So it followed that Tsipras promised that if elected, his party would reopen the state broadcaster. On January 25th, Syriza took office and wasted no time in trying to get ERT back on the air. But it wasn't just the opposition that had a problem with Syriza's draft bill to reinstate the channel. It was the journalists as well. They said that the new government was in too much of a hurry and that the bill was a near facsimile of the legislation that brought Nerit into existence.
It is obvious that the Jazeera government is in a hurry to reinstate the old ERT. They are expecting that the political situation will change and they want to have a friendly governing board in the new broadcaster.
It's political because the new ERT should have nothing to do with Nerit, under no circumstances. When someone says we should start from scratch, he should stand by his words. And politically, it has to be from scratch, because Nerit emerged from something corrupt.
Αυτή τη στιγμή,
To create a new bill from scratch for the relaunch of ERT, Nerit would have to shut down as well. So we'd have two organizations being liquidated. This was impossible. Nerit's cash flow would freeze. Greeks would lose the license fees they'd already paid to fund Nerit.
Ultimately, this is a story about money and politics. ERT was shut down by an austerity-minded government and is now being revived by new leaders with different ideas and a funding plan that not everyone is buying.
Right now, the proposal suggests that every household must pay €3 a month to ERT, which means that it won't have to burden the state budget. So given the country's population, ERT can expect to receive around €300 million.
Out of this budget, if they rehire 2,500 people, around 130 to 140 million will be going for the salaries and the wages. So the rest of the money is not enough to fund the high-quality program. They either have to increase the licensing fee or they will return to a kind of television that is very cheap, but is not what we expect from a state broadcaster.
Let's not forget that ERT's programs and payroll were expensive because of the political appointments over the last 30 years. At one point, we had 5,000 ERT employees. Now we're talking about half of that, which tells you that this license fee can help the state broadcaster produce decent programs.
By resurrecting ERT, Syriza will have delivered on a campaign promise. But the question in Greece is, will the new government give the state broadcaster what it needs to deliver? And if it does, at what cost?
More voices on the download now on the media story in Greece and ERT.
The question is not whether the government's plans are feasible for the re-establishment of the ERT, but whether the government is doing enough for its protection from future attempts to silence it. Let us not forget the reason why the previous government closed down the ERT was precisely because the broadcaster maintained a critical stance towards public policy, and it made visible the impact this had in society.